Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 169th monthly meeting of FOSWELL. And as we have a lot of first-time attendees, FOSWELL stands for Friends on Same Wavelength. That is the acronym FOSWELL, and this is the FOSWELL India Hyderabad chapter. We are especially happy to welcome each one of you to this 169th meeting, as it marks the completion of 14 years of FOSWELL Hyderabad. And this is the first monthly meeting in our 15th year. And what makes it special is that we have had uninterrupted monthly meetings in the last 14 years without exception, including during the COVID time. We had to shift the date of one meeting in March 2020, but we conducted that meeting on a different date. And we'd like to take a moment to pay tributes to our founder, co-founder, and the main inspiration behind the formation of FOSWELL in Cupertino, California, Sri M.L. Swami, who founded this along with a few friends. And FOSWELL Hyderabad happens to be the first international chapter of this organization. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank all the distinguished speakers who have spoken in our 168 meetings. And each one of them has been a very eminent speaker on a variety of subjects. You'll be amazed at the diversity of topics and the range of ideas that were covered in this 168 meetings. And of course, the primary strength of FOSWELL is the senior citizen members. FOSWELL is an organization for senior citizens, but then we also have some young people, and we are making a conscious effort to keep our average age down, because quite a number of my father, who is the founder president, is 94. Dr. Iyer is in his 90s as well, and there are several. He is the president of FOSWELL Adyar chapter. So we are very delighted that we have a distinguished speaker of the eminence of Dr. Ram D. Sriram joining us. And I have been, if I may use the word, hounding him for the past few months to make sure that this landmark meeting is addressed by him. So thank you very much and welcome, Sriram. It's a delight to have you with us. And an additional thing is for those of you who are from HPS, many of you are on the call. Sriram is Nagi's younger brother. And I just learned that he went to school in the same year as Achyut. Achyut Reddy is also our alumni, and he is also on the HPS Society. So welcome to all, and Sriram, it's great to have you join us this evening.
Thank you very much, Subbarao Garu, and it's really my pleasure to address this very distinguished audience. And you call me a distinguished speaker. I'm not as distinguished as some of the members of the audience here. So
we look forward.
My pleasure. And also sometimes it's very hard to follow in the footsteps of some of the speakers before me. In any case, I'll try to do my best around here. I have a lot of slides here, but Subbarao Garu here has the copy of the slides, and you can pass it on to anyone who requests the slides. So I'm going, and then also I'm glad that the cricket match is over. Otherwise, many of you will be probably tuning into the cricket match on your iPhones and so on. Just got over with India hitting 111. So I'm.
So I'll just take a few minutes. So we have a couple of items before we invite you to start the presentation. Dr. Amresh Babu Chandi.
So we can continue with the prayer by.
Okay. Somshekara Aru.
Yes, sir.
May I request you to please read the prayer?
Yes. Heaven of freedom, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where the knowledge is free where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where the words come out with the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country away.
Thank you, Somsekhar Rao. Mr. Somsekhar Rao is our joint secretary. He retired as a chief of the PRO department in South Central Railway. He's one of our founder members. And I have now the pleasure of inviting a very distinguished doctor, Dr. Amaresh Rao. He is the head of the Department of Cardiothoracic and Vascular Surgery at our prestigious NIMS. And those of you who are not from Hyderabad, it stands for Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences. So may I invite you, Amaresh, to introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Introducing a speaker as distinguished as today is like packing the Ramayana into 2 pages. It is I can't possibly do justice without eating into time, which would be further injustice to everybody else. However, Dr. Ram D. Sriram is every Indian parent's dream come true, academic dream come true. Alumnus of Hyderabad Public School, and then from engineering graduation from IIT Madras, and then he goes on to do his MS and PhD from Carnegie Mellon University, Pittsburgh, USA. And from there, he was a faculty at MIT. He has academic qualifications from as good as it gets. Currently, he is the Chief of Software and Systems Division, Information Technology Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. For those of us, for those unilluminated like us, NIST, I just looked up, it is one of the premier institutions of the world, which has several Nobel laureates. And from one of Dr. Ram Sriram's talk, it already had more than 2,500 publications 10 years ago. So that's the kind of voluminous as well as quality of the organization we are looking at. Before joining the Software and Systems Division, he was a leader of the Design and Process Group in the Manufacturing Systems Integration Division, Manufacturing Engineering Laboratory, where he conducted research on standards for interoperability of computer-aided design systems. Of course, he is well decorated. He has so many awards from the American Society of Mechanical Engineering, the Design Automation Award, the Distinguished Service Award, Washington Academy of Science Distinguished Career in Engineering Sciences, the ASME-CIE Division's Lifetime Achievement Awards, the CMU CE Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Reibel Distinguished Public Service Award, and of course, nothing beats being an IIT Madras Distinguished Alumni Award as well. He has co-authored or authored nearly 300 publications, including books and videos. And he is also the founding co-editor of the International Journal for Artificial Intelligence in Engineering. You know, for those parents who feel that he would have been a doctor, I think he comes into that. We have come to that stage where people will be amazed at how much of engineering work doctors are doing, how much of medical work engineers are doing. So, 2 things. I just want to share 2 things which set up the tone for today's talk on transforming healthcare through digital revolution. One is that the FDA has recently done away with animal testing prior to human testing, just because there are so many chip models and other computer models available for testing, which are now reliable. And 2 AI systems have cleared the USMLE, United States Medical Licensing Examination, just recently. with 60%, which is almost the average score. So when I was looking at Dr. Ramdi Shriram's career across the various work he has done, I was reminded of a statement that Vyasachishtam Jagat Sarvam. That means Ved Vyas through Mahabharata has covered the entire world. So I think there is no doubt in calling that Dr. Ram is the new Ved Vyas, because his actions have covered almost the entire spectrum. I'm sure in his talk he would elaborate more on it. But when we look at his work, almost everything touches every aspect of our life. But there is no doubt he has a career spanning more than 2.5 decades in artificial intelligence, with working with some of the pioneers in this. And what better person than us? See, one of the beauty of his talks, which we see, is that he makes all these talks so comprehensible to the common man. So I'm sure we'll have a huge academic feast today on transforming healthcare through digital revolution. The stage is all yours, Dr. Ram.
Thank you, Dr. Amaresh. Dr. Amaresh, apart from being a very accomplished cardiothoracic vascular surgeon, has also completed his advanced management program in healthcare at ISB. That's where I first met him. Thank you very much. I'd like to remind everybody to please not unmute yourself. It will disturb the speaker. And also, please type in your email address, full name and phone number in the chat box so that we can send you future invites. And your questions to the distinguished speaker may also be put in the chat box. With that, may I now invite Dr. Sriram to speak to us on this very interesting subject. You can share your screen, Dr. Sriram.
Can you see my screen, Dr. Subbarao?
Yeah, I can. Yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dr. Amaresh, for that really long introduction. And as Subbarao Garu just mentioned, you are more distinguished than me. So I'm really humbled by your introduction. And one small correction, I'm not really an alumnus of Hyderabad Public School.
I know.
I wish I was, but my dad could only afford one person at the time. So we decided to send Nagi, and you know the story, Nagi was so mischievous that they had to put him in HPS, and there's a long history behind that.
I know.
I wanted to be a doctor, but again, fate would say, do it. I went to IIT Madras, and after that, that's where things went off. Okay. So anyway, let me put this in a presentation mode. Okay. And so my talk's title is Transforming Healthcare Through Digital Revolution. And it's kind of based on a paper that I wrote about a few years ago, but I've been thinking about it for the last decade or so. And then there's also a talk that on YouTube if you want to watch, but all the slides are with Subbarao Garu, so you can get a copy of them. And if anyone wants that paper also, I can send it to you. So the talk is arranged as follows. I will give you a perspective on healthcare, my view. Then I'll talk about 4 digital revolution. If I have time, I'll talk about some case studies. So in terms of the healthcare, there are a few topics which I will cover. A vision of healthcare, and I will introduce this concept called P9 medicine, which I came up with. Then I will cover a few other things given the time here. So United States spends about $4.1 trillion on healthcare. Actually, it was in 2020. Now it's much more than that. Now, GDP of India is less than this. So you can, in terms of the numbers, you can see, compare this with the GDP of India. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in the system, and we believe that the high information technology will help reduce this cost. And you also have to understand that there are multiple parties which are playing different roles. As you can see, some of the doctors here have taken management courses, because management also becomes a big part of the healthcare enterprise. So if you look at the future healthcare vision, there are advances happening in several threads around here. One is the advances in healthcare technologies, like the Human Genome Project, pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals, medical devices. So there are a lot of advances are being made in each of these things. For many of you doctors, if you go back about a decade ago, and you'll see the kind of medical devices you were using then and the medical devices you're using now, you see a lot of difference. And the second path is the advances in the healthcare practice itself, in terms of the disease management, evidence-based healthcare, continuum of care. And the last one, which is very interesting, the recent one, is this whole notion of mind-body medicine, such. Okay, actually, in addition to all the things that people talk about in disease management, mind-body medicine is very important because the human being is not at a single dimension. We have to look at our health on multi-dimensions. And there are many dimensions, but I'll just mention 3 of them. For example, you have the pathological dimension. That is, if someone is under a lot of stress, we have this thing called the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal axis. What happens here is that some hormones are generated when the stress level goes up. So hypothalamus sends a message to the pituitary gland, which sends a message to the adrenal gland. As a result of that, cortisol is produced. So because of this, that cortisol has got all kinds of negative effects on the human health in terms of suppressing your immune system and things like that. Then there's a second dimension, which is actually this dimension you can call the pathological dimension. And then there's a second dimension, which is called the psychological, the psychological dimension as such. Okay. So, and in this dimension, what happens is there are a lot of, like for example, prayer and meditation and those kinds of things actually reduce the stress. People wonder why you go to the temple or why you go to the church to pray, or why do you pray at all in the house? You know, these actually are stress-reducing mechanisms. And somehow, like for example, meditation helps to reduce, even if your stress level is high, it reduces the production of the cortisol. And that has been proven over and over again with a lot of experiments I've done at Harvard University and other places to show how doing meditation reduces stress. And there's a third dimension, which is also a P dimension, which is person-to-person dimension, or the sociological dimension, where you have actually people, the social networks and those kinds of things. Like for example, when there's a death in the family, you have a lot of people coming together, and that actually helps you to reduce the stress. So these 3 dimensions are very important. So then Newsweek had this article called The New Science of Mind. And there are other dimensions like the food, for example, the food we eat is also an extremely important. And all these things are, you should not think about healthcare as just the pathological dimension as such. Like it's just not the pathology, the pathological basis of diseases and so on. So that's not the dimension that you need to look at. You need to look at all these dimensions as such. And that's why, as I said, meditation and social and person-to-person meetings are the sociological dimension. There are 3 P's in there, which are very important. And then you have nutrition, and also that's important too. Then you have a third thread here, which is the advances in computing, imaging, and information technology. As you can see in terms of software, the internet, cloud, data analytics, and computers are becoming faster and faster. You have the networking and communication technologies. And finally, you have these things called mobile personal computing devices, which are your iPhones and are Android phones. And I'm sure every one of you have these things. And these things are going to play a major role in the future of healthcare. Okay, so much for the healthcare as such. And to make all this happen in terms of the information technology world, and actually this information technology world is also helping you to go into other dimensions like, for example, the sociological dimension with Facebook and the social media. And then you also have programs on the internet which will help you in this mindfulness. So if you Google mindfulness, there are actually programs which will help you to do meditation using internet as the medium or the computer as the medium. So the digital, there is a massive, in the last 5 decades or so, there's been a number of things happening in the information technology world. And one of the things, it so happened that after graduating from IIT, I went to Carnegie Mellon. And there I was extremely lucky to work under the tutelage of 2 great stalwarts, one in engineering and one in computer scientist. And as you know, Raj Reddy is one of them. And he actually revolutionized speech. And he was also a person who was responsible for me to getting into this this field of AI and information technology. So apart from Steve Fenves, who was my PhD advisor, I mean, these two stalwarts I was lucky to work with. And in life, you actually have to have some kind of a luck like that also. So in terms of the digital revolutions, you have there are 4 of them here: the omics, AI, extended reality, and internet. And I will talk about these things later on briefly. So I'm just going to skip this. So then I came up with a concept called the P9 medicine. Remember the 3 P's I talked about in terms of managing human health? And similarly, there is this notion of this P9 concept, where medicine of the future is going to be personalized. So that's for every individuals. Although we all are human beings, we all are probably very similar in terms of our genomic construction. Each one has got variations in the genes. And if you kind of know the individual, we'll come to that later on, the individual genetic makeup, and that might help you to deliver medicine in a better way, or healthcare in a better way. So the medicine has to be personalized to individual. Medicine has to be predictive. Like, for example, based on the past history, based on your health records and so on, you should be able to predict what is going to happen in the future. It has to be participatory. So the patients, it has to be patient-centric, because the patient is the key to the whole thing. So the patient will have to participate in the healthcare process. It has to be precise. So like when the doctors give recommendations, when you do decisions, the decisions will have to be precise, and you cannot be ambiguity into the thing. Medicine has to be preventive. Like before you get the disease, you should be able to prevent it. Like, for example, you take, people have colonoscopies. And the reason behind having the colonoscopy is so that you can prevent the colon cancer happening in the future. So similarly, there are lots of things you can do, like you take vaccines because you want to prevent against COVID and so on. So again, flu and so forth. So it has to be preventive. Medicine has to be pervasive. That means it has to be at the point of care, in a sense that it has to be everywhere. Like, for example, many of you are sitting in your homes right now, and suppose you have, chest pain or something like that, you should be able to be taken care of immediately there itself. So at your point of care. So that's why I said medicine has to be pervasive. Or if you're running somewhere and if you feel very tired and if you're going to get a heart attack, care should be given there immediately at the point. It has to be privacy preserving. And the other 3 P's are also important, because especially when you're talking about electronic health records and so on, you have to make sure that that your privacy is maintained and these things don't leak out elsewhere. Like if you have a particular disease, you don't want other people to know, and the doctors will have to be careful in terms of making sure that particular thing is secure, which comes to the productive part of it. When this is security actually again is on several dimensions. For example, when you're talking about medical implants, that means those things will have to be secure. Like someone can hack into your pacemaker and do all kind of damage. So you have to have security there. Then you have security of electronic health records too, so that those electronic health, when you send information from one system to another system, it has to be secure. And finally, it has to be priced reasonably. Okay. So anyway, so this is a book which I co-authored several years ago. This is, if you look at the medical enterprise, there are various levels here. One is at the doctor levels, and then the second level, if you take the hospitals, you have the hospital rooms and things like that. It's called the micro tier. Then you have to take the entire hospital. It's called the meso tier, where you have in the hospital, but inter-hospital, there are inter-facility of information being transferred. And similarly, it doesn't happen in India very much, but in the United States, we have hospitals all across the US, and you can go to any hospital anytime, and your information has to be seamlessly transferred between these hospitals. So there are several levels here of information being exchanged, and interoperability becomes a big problem around here. So we wrote this volume called How Do You Procure Interoperability Within an Hospital Setting or within a clinic setting, and so on. So there's a number of issues of electronic health records, which I won't go into details. This is a totally different talk, because all your medical records have longitudinally over the 70 or 80 years will have to be stored in this electronic health record. And there are a number of issues associated with it in terms of storing that particular record, manipulating the record, and learning from those records. Because if you have this knowledge for about 70 years of the electronic health records, you can use machine learning and do all kinds of very neat things. You can mine, you can create new knowledge, and that's how new knowledge is created anyway over the years. But right now it's done by evidence-based and so on. In the future, it'll be probably be based using machine learning techniques on this electronic health records. And finally, you have the transfer of this information from one unit to another unit, and that's where you have interoperability issues. Security becomes a big thing in all this. So I don't want to go into too much details of that. Now I'll go into the digital revolutions. The first one is the omic revolution. So if you look at the levels of biological information, you can go all the way from the ecologies to the DNA level. So normally the first part of it, we call it healthcare, and the second part of it, we call biosciences. And another way of looking at it is from genomics to, actually now there's something called the phenomics. That is how the human being kind of behaves over the period of his or her life. So it's kind of interesting that the name Om kind of came into picture because if you look at it from Indian philosophical sense, or Indian, the Hindu religion, where people use the word called Om. So right now, Om is really a very interesting word because it actually does something more than just holistic sense, but it also regenerates you completely. Okay, so anyway, that's by the side way. However, the home means it's like an integrated view of a particular field. So we have genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, cellomics, and all these are very important part of it, because then you represent these things in computers. And as you can see how this whole thing kind of flows. I don't have too much time to go into each one of them. But then what happens is that in each of those omics that I talked about, that I showed you, there are what are known as the networks. And these networks can be encoded in a computational form. For example, here is a gene regulation network. I believe this is for appropriate for an yeast. So what happens in this case is that you can see the genes interacting with other genes, like one gene has an action on the other gene, which has an action on the third gene, and so on and so forth. Okay, and you can create this massive gene networks, something like this. And here is a regulatory network for this Helobacterium. So someone kind of sat down and actually created. Now these things can be created automatically. So these gene networks are created again in a computer, and everything I'm talking about is in the computer as such. So, but anyway, but again, if you look at the DNA part of it, DNA is actually a 4-letter word. Just like you have 0 and 1 in terms of the binary in the computers as binary, in DNA you have GCAT. So this is a 4-letter word, but this GCAT kind of forms all kinds of combinations where you end up producing these proteins eventually because of this from mRNA, from RNA to DNA. There is this whole two proteins. There is whole process which goes on there, and then proteins are created by just manipulating this GCAT. In other words, that GCAT from the DNA you get the amino acids, and amino acids from amino acids you get the proteins, and these proteins interact in very interesting ways. So then you can create what are known as the protein-protein interaction networks, and these are useful in many ways. And an example is that if someone has this bariatric surgery, what happens is that if you look at the protein-protein interactions before the bariatric surgery and after the bariatric surgery, we can find out that there are certain proteins which play a big role, which get expressed. And these are the proteins which are responsible for the person losing weight and so on. So this may be obvious to many of the doctors who are in the GI field, especially. Hey, we know what are the proteins which happens, but imagine a computer kind of coming up with this based on the representational schemes and inference. So again, you can come up with what are the proteins which are responsible for this transition through the protein-protein interaction. Remember, we had the gene-gene interaction networks with genes interacting other genes. Now the genes produce these proteins, and proteins are interacting with other proteins. So you create this protein-protein interaction networks, which could be pretty huge networks and computationally very interesting. Then you have the signal transduction networks. Like for example, in the COVID case, you have this the virus which goes and attacks this ACE2 receptor on a cell, but it so happens there is another receptor called TMPRSS2. So it's a co-receptor. You have to have both these things, and there was some work done at AIG who kind of showed this mechanism, I guess, during the initial stages of the COVID virus. And then you can see that there is this whole set of signals which are going in there in the cell, and how this transforms in this cytokines. You can, again, this is a pretty complex way of doing things, but the simple thing is that there are some messages which are being passed across the cell, like the virus goes and sits on that ACE2, and then TMPRSS2 goes and cuts off parts of the spike, and then the virus is put into the cell, and it sends a signal all the way through the DNA level, as you can see down in the bottom here. This is the gene here. Some genes get activated, and a whole lot of actions take place around here. Again, this is a complex process, but computationally, I can represent it and simulate it. Finally, you have this metabolic networks, as you can see. And again, there's an example here at the bottom part in terms of the liver, how the alcohol, is the ethanol is transformed to this acetaldehyde and acetone eventually, and so on, and what happens in here. And these are the metabolic networks. And there was if you for those of you interested in this, you can there is a there at University of, I think, California, San Diego, they developed this thing called Recon 2, and it's the most comprehensive virtual construction. You see, we're talking about virtual. So virtual means it's in silico. So a lot of experiments people do in vitro. Now this is in silico. You're doing the experiments in the computer. So in the computer, once you have the metabolic network, you can see what happens if I make a small change in this part of the network. How is it propagated to the rest of the network? So advantage of this is you can do everything in silico, and then you can do experiments in vitro or in vivo, depending on whatever experiments you do. So we have actually done that for the Alzheimer's case, where we took the Alzheimer's pathway and we did a in silico kind of, because Alzheimer's, by the way, happens there are two paths. One is the amyloid proteins, another is the tau tangles. So nowadays, I think recently, yesterday, I read somewhere the FDA, Eli Lilly is trying to get a drug from FDA, which actually reduces the amyloid plaques. However, there is also the tau tangles which need to be taken into account. And we found out a pathway of how that actually occurs by doing in silico experiments along with our collaborators at NIH who did the in vitro experiments. So it's a combination of in vitro and in silico kind of things we can do in the future. And I think, I'm sure in India also you're doing a lot of these kinds of things where you have your major hospitals which can work with your organizations like I think there's a Center for Molecular Biology and so on, and these three things can get together where you can do both in silico and in vitro experiments. Okay, and then if you go to, and there is this place called ISB, which is at, I think in Seattle, Leroy Hood started this, and they have many of these computer programs already in place, and you can go to their website and look at it. Okay, next I will go to artificial intelligence. And many of you probably read about AI and so on. I don't want to go, I won't go into too much details, but except I will just give a short definition, because intelligence again is a multi-dimensional here. And there are a couple of definitions. For example, the ability to meet novel situations successfully with proper behavioral adjustments is one definition. And there's goal-oriented definition, behavior-oriented definition, so on. I don't want to go into too much details on it, except that if you look at, if someone is intelligent, what does it mean? That person can perceive and model external worlds, understand, solve problems, generalization and learning, planning and predicting, using languages, and so on. But there are other things associated with intelligent agent. This is aesthetic appreciation, emotion, sensory acuteness. So Howard Gardner wrote this very nice book called the Multiple Frames of Mind or something like that. You can Google and find out Howard Gardner. And now what happens a lot of times, for example, I got into IIT, but IIT only tests you in one dimension of this intelligence, like quantitative intelligence. How good are you in this quantitative intelligence in solving problems? It doesn't kind of deal with other kinds of intelligence as such, like music appreciation, aesthetic appreciation, and all kinds of things it doesn't deal with. It only deals with a single line, a single dimension. But intelligence is not at the single dimension, it's multiple dimensions. So when people talk about artificial intelligence, they should also look at these multiple dimensions. And here is one view of AI, where you have the environment, and from the environment, you have all these sensors, like, for example, my perception, I'm seeing, so the information is coming into me, and you are talking through the ear, the information is coming into me. Similarly, taste and all kinds of sensors, my hand, feeling, things like that, sensor information is coming. And that's perception. And the intelligent agent now takes us all this information and does some analysis inside or some inference, and then it takes a particular action. And if we talk about the robotic things, you do manipulators, like I can manipulate with my hands and make changes to the environment. It's a kind of simple definition. So in terms of the evolution of artificial intelligence, there's a whole history associated with it. And I think for those of you in the audience who read Indian philosophy, there's a lot of work which was done by the Indian philosophers. They came up with the notion of ontologies, which are pretty vogue in AI right now. They talked about anumana or inference. So these are the kinds of, and then there in India, there are 6 Indian philosophies, as you all know, like Nyaya, Samkhya, Vaisheshika, I think. And then you have things like yoga, then you have things like Mimamsa and Vedanta, and all of them have very nice, these are the orthodox Indian philosophies. They're also heterodox, like Buddhism and Jainism. For those of you who are really interested in knowing the history of AI, you should really read through these philosophies, because they really talk about the notion of being and notion of the objects, how we think, and so on. And Western philosophers came much later on, the Neolithic area, Hume, Russell, Turing, and all these guys. But I think that Indian philosophers were much, much ahead 5,000 years ago. But Western philosophers are reinventing what has happened in the Indian philosophy. And I'm not telling this to the Indian audience, but I tell it to every audience. I gave this talk so many times, and I tell everyone this, and people go back to the literature and come back to this and says, yeah, you're right. In terms of AI itself, it started in 1956. And then there was early years, which was the rise of knowledge-based systems between 57, the year I was born, to 1980. And there were things like GPS General, and Raj Reddy at Carnegie Mellon University developed this year's speech understanding system, the pioneering speech understanding system and speech recognition system, sorry. And then when I went to CMU, what happened was that there was this whole notion called the first wave or first revolution, where they said that knowledge is power. Then it happened for about a decade or so. Then there was a silent period from 1990 to 2000, where actually things were happening. There's commercialization of AI was happening. Speech recognition was one good example of that, but it was called the silent period. Then you saw this thing called neural networks, which came to the fore from 2000 to 2015, which is called the second wave, the deep learning. You heard a lot about this neural networks, and you have heard about something called ChatGPT now, which actually is a neural network-based system. So there's a lot of activity went on there. And the reason why it happened is because of the power of computation with GPUs and CPUs that made neural networks feasible. And there's a class of problems in neural networks like image processing, which could be done very well with this kind of technology. Now we are seeing what is known as the symbiosis of neural and knowledge networks, which is happening in the last few years. I'll come to this later on. And finally, this is debatable, is this notion of the conscious machine. And now, can machines have consciousness? And I don't want to go into the philosophical aspects of it, but it's some food for thought for those of you who are going to have dinner soon. And there's also this nice talk by Henry Cox that you should be looking into. And in terms of the AI, there are 3 waves: the knowledge-based system wave, the neural networks wave, and the neurosymbolic computing. And here is how a typical knowledge-based system model looks like. You have the inference mechanism, you have the context, and then you have the knowledge base. And what people, and the inference mechanism is the Anumana I talked about, which can manifest itself in several types of strategies: backward chaining, forward chaining, constraint propagation. Again, don't want to go into details of these things, but those things exist. And knowledge is represented in different forms. For example, MySyn in medicine, which is a pioneering in knowledge-based expert system, where you could actually, it's for infectious diseases here, internal medicine essentially, for infectious diseases. And it had an interaction with the user. This is about 1975 to 80, so you can see 50 years old. But what it did was it encoded the knowledge in rules or heuristics. And you can, each one of you probably are using these heuristics all the time. And especially if you're in the medical field, you use it. That what is difference between an expert doctor and a novice doctor. An expert doctor has all these heuristics in his or her mind. And in this case here, basically, we are trying to find out, if you look at rule number 145, it says if his therapy under consideration is one of those, people are using erythromycin, lincomycin, and so on. And if meningitis is a possible cause, then now the therapy is not the potential therapy for use against a particular organism. So these kinds of rules are there in the medical field. And also, if the identity of the organism is this bacteroids, then you recommend one of these medicines. So these are the kinds of rules that doctors kind of develop over the years. Or you can develop from the textbooks like Harrison and Principles of Internal Medicine, Harrison, and so on. So these are some of the rules there. And so that's how the expert systems were developed at that time. And there were problems associated in terms of lack of rules. And creation of this knowledge is not very easy. It's pretty complex. So there were a lot of problems associated with it. The second wave is the neural network wave, where then we entered into this. Those systems really didn't learn very much. So then we have this era of neural networks, and machine learning became very popular in the last decade or two. So if you can see the whole field of artificial intelligence, the machine learning is a subfield of it, neural networks is a subfield of it, and finally we have something called deep learning, which is what is in vogue right now. So if you look at the different kinds of machine learning models, again, a lot of people, some of you who are working in the statistics world recognize this regression models, decision tree models, and a combination of these models. But then these are all based on some features. But then you have the models which are based on raw data, which are the neural networks. As you can see in the bottom here, in a neural network, what you have is you have all these input nodes and you have some output nodes. And this is a system which was developed for diabetic retinopathy, where you take this, you give, the way you do it is you give the system millions and millions of these images around here. And then you tell, the way the system learns is you give an image and say, oh no, there is no diabetic retinopathy. You give another image and says it's mild. Similarly, you give thousands of images and you have this classification here. And the system learns something called a learning function around here. And suddenly it sees something which you have not shown it before, but it is very similar to this. It will tell you whether it's moderate diabetic retinopathy or not. And similar, and this is very good for image processing. Similarly, you can do in other domains. Third wave is the neurosymbolic computing. Now, one of the problems with this neural networks is that if you suppose you kind of train a neural network to identify a guitar or a penguin through images, and then you do some, and then what happens is that you can actually show it a different image, something like this. It will think it's a guitar. It will think it's a penguin. So you can fool the neural network. And here is a classical example which can happen here. The cars like the Tesla, they can drive without human intervention. And what they do essentially is that they're taught how to recognize stop sign and so on. So, but then what you can do is that if you put a small thing on the stop sign, some sticker, something like that here, it'll think it's a speed limit and it'll go through it. Instead of stopping, it'll go through it and accidents can happen. So these are called Trojans. And you can introduce Trojans in the neural networks, both at the training level and both at the recognition level. So that becomes a big problem. So what happens is that there are all these things which literature should be interesting in. there's a guy, Gary Marcus and Ernest Davis, wrote a book called Rebooting AI. And this is a must for everyone who is working on AI right now. And they show why neural networks cannot handle many of the commonsensical kind of things where human beings are great at. Daniel Kahneman wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And what he said is there are two kinds of the thought process, two kinds of thinking processes going on. One is that we react very fast. Okay, like for example, if you see a rope while you are walking and the rope is kind of curled, your first thinking is maybe it's a snake. Okay, so without even any thought processes, you kind of think it's a snake and you step back. However, thinking a little bit and more rationally, you'll see, well, how can a snake be in middle of my room? I mean, in India, I don't know, maybe it's feasible probably. And you can think a little bit more and say, yeah, this is not really a snake. It's like a rope which is coiled and so on. That is thinking slow. And that is a second set of activities which go in your brain. The first one is the neural network-based thing where you immediately recognize without thinking because the neurons fire and you think it's a snake. The second one is more knowledge-based, which is more in terms of slowly you have your knowledge structures. Yeah, I'm in my house and this looks like more like a rope and so on. So you have a second type of reasoning which goes in there, and that's thinking slow. So in other words, you should have both the fast and the thinking slow part of it. So that's why we have what is known as a neurosymbolic computing. And actually, I wrote about this about 30 years ago in my 25 years ago. So I wrote a book on intelligent systems for engineering, where I talked about how neural networks and the knowledge-based systems can be combined together. And it's happening right now. So I'm not going to go into too much of these details called open knowledge networks and so on. But what happens is that these knowledge-based knowledge networks can do certain things. Neural networks can do certain things. And you have to combine both the things. And that's what we are working on, how you can combine both the OKNs and the neural networks. So that's in brief, these are the three revolutions in AI. And AI can be used across the life cycle for the medical world. And this is across the human span. And it's been so far very good at doing these kinds of things, image processing. But there are other things that AI can be used, like predicting death in the hospital, promoting patient safety, and so on. And there is this paper by Rick Topol, which talks about, and he also wrote a book on a number of examples that he has given in terms of in various areas, gastroenterology, pathology, dermatology, ophthalmology, where AI has been used. And for those of doctors in the audience, it may be very useful for you to look through this. And Setu and I wrote this paper on how AI, artificial intelligence, and digital, how artificial intelligence can be used for diabetics care. So, and the next step that is happening again in the medical world associated with AI is robotics. So now robotics essentially mostly involves with the sensors and manipulators, and essentially whatever I talked before this is more of symbolic or neural processing in a computer. It's mostly software. Now robotics come into picture. So a lot of hardware also in here, although hardware is used to do the processing computationally, but this particular hardware is used to manipulate things. So a robot is essentially a physical agent, and you can see this robots being used in the medical field in several ways. Like even there are robots which move around the hospitals helping patients, and there's this thing called the Da Vinci robot, which helps you in the surgery for more precision things, and there are wheelchair-based robots and so on. So robots are, and then here it's an interesting paper for those of you who are interested. I think there's 15 medical robots that are changing the world, and you can look through this thing. Okay. Then you have this notion of extended reality. In terms of extended reality, it's a term referring to the real and virtual. See, the problem is that, as I said, this is in silico versus in vitro kind of things. Here, there's a human being like you and me, and then there's also the computer. And then if can be considered carbon beings, and there is a silicon computer can be considered as a silicon. So now there's this carbon silicon interface. Now, depending on how good this interface is, there's a wide spectrum being totally immersed into it, or just you having augmented reality. So there's an augmented reality and the total virtual reality. So there's a spectrum there. and it can be used in the medicine. Like, for example, here is a Keshav Das, who's a professor at University of Illinois, has developed this system for helping people in this for training doctors. And this is the one which is training them in the CPR. I think one of those intubation is helping them on how to do it. And you can see this particular video here shows you in the virtual world. Now what you can do is that you can actually the patient is virtual, everything is virtual. Now this particular system, is virtual reality system, helps the doctors, trains the doctors, and it will tell you at every stage what you should do and things like that. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move this thing. Anyway, you can do those things, okay? And then now the fourth one of the revolution is the internet revolution. So I'm going to go through it a little bit fast, but if you look at the internet, rise of the internet from 1969 to onwards, and one of the things that made internet happen is this thing called FTP and TCP protocol, which was developed by a person named Vint Cerf. And Vint Cerf and I worked on the next set of concepts that you're going to see. So if you look at this notion of the Internet of Things, which is, again, I think someone mentioned here that they're talking about IoT. So what is IoT? IoT is something where you have the physical world and you have all the sensors which are connected to this physical world, and then you have a lot of sensing and acting. So when all these things over the network, where you have the sensors which are part of you, and you are part of, and you are with the network, you have what are known as the Internet of Things or cyber physical systems. And in these things and you have some control in there. You have got this known as cooperative cyber physical systems. And here is an example of a cyber physical system in a hospital where you have a patient, and the patient is hooked up to all kinds of monitors and so on. And you can see the sensors on the patients measuring various kinds of things like the EKG monitor or the temperature to the thermostat, and then it's connected to the internet. Then you have this society where people are now people are talking through the internet. And if you have formal social organizations, you have cyber organizational networks, and these things combining with the Internet of Things, you have cyber physical human systems. And here you have the cyber world and the human world, they are together. And there's some organization here. But then you have informal, and then here is an example of this where you have previously, remember, the patients in a hospital in a particular room, they're all connected to the doctor's offices, to the nurses' stations. And then the whole lot of networks are happening around here. There's a cyber physical human systems, there's a transportation network. So CPHS is an important aspect of the future. Now, finally, you have Facebook and those kinds of social networks, which are not really organized. So you have what are known as cyber social networks. So you have this thing called smart network systems and societies, where you have interconnected cyber physical and social networks. So you have the cyber, you have the human, and they're all connected together. And that's the future. And here you can see where the hospitals are connected to each other. The doctors have their own social media. The patients have their own social media. And this is the trend that we are seeing right now. And a lot of, I'm not going to go into the research problems here, but there are a number, and then I've outlined in my paper what are the research problems. Okay. And so the future now is the smart network systems and societies. So that's where it is happening. It's Internet of everything. And from the Internet of Things to Internet of everything. So these are the technology. And in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'll go through some of the examples, a few examples. I don't know, Dr. Subbarao, how much time do I have?
I think you're doing good. I mean, it's
Can
only.
I go through the examples, or I can stop anytime? So, pardon?
Another 5-10 minutes is good, and then we can take questions.
Let me spend about 3 to 4 minutes on each one of this example.
Sure.
See, what happens is, these are the examples we are working at NIST. And the first example is about the big data measurements and how we have used AI techniques for solving a problem in macular degeneration. So what we have is we have the biologists and we have the computer scientists. So in this case, for the stem cells are grown in petri dishes, and the stem cells kind of grow over across the time. And when the stem cells are growing, what we do is that we take photographs of the stem cells, just like you take panoramic views with your iPhone or Android phone. We take photos of that and we stitch them. And then what we do is, in a computational perspective, we do image correction, stitching, and then we send it back to the experts who kind of do this. Who tell us that, who visually inspect the thing and says, this area, this is what happening, this area that's happening, and send it back. And our machine learning systems learn these things. And then this process goes on and goes on until the confidence improves a lot in their techniques. And I'll give you an example here. The example is this age-related macular degeneration, where about 11 million people in US suffer, and also in India too. As you grow old, and many of us have this macular degeneration gene. Of course, the gene has to express itself. And when you have this macular degeneration, you can only, if the peripheral vision, the direct vision is pretty bad, you can only see the peripherally, as you can see in the example out, as you can see in this particular example on the top. So the idea is to get the 20/20 vision. And to do that, what you do is that you get the stem cells, but of course, you know, the stem cells, you have the pluripotent stem cells, where you can grow them, and you can grow them into any stem cell that you want. And that research is being done in AIG and other places in Hyderabad. So you can see this happening. But these stem cells are grown in these petri dishes over a long period of time. And then what you do is that you can only take only those stem cells which are potentially good, because the colonies are, what happens in a stem cell is these colonies keep growing, and only certain colonies are good. And through our system, which I showed before, we can predict which are the colonies which will be good stem cells, and we take this and we implant in the eye, and your macular degeneration can be cured in a way. And now the impact of this is, it's being tested right now we developed it along with our NIH colleagues, and now it's being tested at this stage. So, and I'm not going to go into I'm not going too much detail here. Sometimes what happens is we don't have enough data or enough images, so we generate them using something called GANs. And you probably have seen this GANs in action. All kinds of fake videos and so on and so forth are being generated through this. So neural networks can be used to do that. Yeah. And here is an example which we did about almost 15 to 20 years ago with AIG. This is, and many of you know what's the story here. Like for endoscopy, goes until that part of the stomach, and it doesn't go into the green part of it. This is where endoscope goes. And then people, when they do colonoscopy, they do only for the large intestine. For the small intestine, you really don't have much to go. So at the time, AIG was using this thing called capsule endoscope. So where you kind of take a capsule and you swallow the capsule, and the capsule actually is taking images as it's going through the small intestine. And these images are recorded, as you can see that this is the capsule, and the images are recorded. You wear a belt and the images are recorded, and there's this video or images which are produced. And what we did was that we took all the images here, and we did work with the doctors at AIG, and they told us, I mean, you have to literally sit down here, and they told us which features are, how do you recognize these particular features and so on. And they said that, well, if this particular thing is normal, this is abnormal, and so on. So using machine learning techniques, what we can do now is that our system can predict, when a new image is shown to it, it will show whether this particular thing has potential problems or so. And then what we did is that these particular features are mapped to the appropriate disease through this ontology that we developed for the GI system. And the ontologies are something which look like this, where there are objects, there are entities which are related to other entities. Again, I didn't want to go into too much details about ontologies, but these are called ontologies, these representational schemes. And then here so then what happens is that, you have something called idiopathic inflammatory bowel disease, and Crohn's disease is a part of that, and ulcerative colitis is also a part of that. And then we have those features that we have extracted using our machine learning techniques. So those features can be mapped into this. So what happens is, in the future, when you have when you have images from either endoscopes or this capsule endoscopy images, and those images can now tell you that what kind of a potential disease you have, and where exact location is an interesting problem. We are doing some work on the location of this particular, how you locate exactly where this thing is happening. That's still in the research stage. But anyway, you can now, this is what I showed you is after the fact. Once the capsule comes out, once you have all the images, that's when we did our analysis. But you should also be able to do it as the capsule is going through the system, and it can identify where exactly is the problem. And you can take, using those robotic devices, a capsule can be a robotic device, and then you can do the operation there itself. And that's happening. And that is not only the future, it's the present too. So that's an example here. And the other last final example is this asthma response. And asthma is actually a pretty, it's about 12 million people suffer for it, and there's a $56 billion cost in there. And I think in United States, in India also, this is a growing disease. And there's UCI, University of California, Irvine, with Ramesh Jain has developed a nice little example, which I show you. And what happens in this case is that you develop what is known as an health persona. Now, you have these things called, again, this is all connected to the smart network systems, which I showed you before. I'll show you how everything fits together in the next slide or two. So if you want to define this, you can define this health persona because you have this thing, logical sensors, where you have calendar data and so on. You have fitness tracking sensors, like we have our Apple Watch. And actually, Apple Watch also is a physiological sensor. So it goes into this thing called health persona for every individual. Now, each one of us will have this health persona because all the sensor information is coming in, and you can create this one. And once you create this health persona, then what you do is that you have electronic health records. And then within electronic health records, people have this individual genomics information, like what kind of mutations you potentially have. For example, if someone has a mutation called CYP2C19, this warfarin is not really, this Plavix drug is not very useful for them. They need to do something else. So before you give Plavix, suppose you want to avoid the stroke, so you give Plavix. But then if you give it to someone who has the CYP2C19 mutation, it doesn't really work. So you need to have an alternative way of doing it. And that's what I call personalized medicine around here. So with this, what you do is that with this and the health persona combined together, you create this thing called PHR. Now, every individual has a PHR. They have the electronic health records from the hospitals. Their genomic data is already there based on their genomic analysis. And then you have this health persona, then you can create this personal health records. And I'm going through this example fast here. And here is what you do. You create on this left-hand side, this is the environment around here. Information is coming from the sensors in the environment. Like, for example, the air quality index in Hyderabad is not too bad, but actually it's kind of bad in a sense sometimes. In Delhi, it's really bad. And so the sensors constantly kind of, there are sensors all around the city, which is getting this air quality index. And then you have this personalized, this personal health record around here. So then what is happening here is you can see people are coughing and so on and so forth, and they enter that into the social media. All that information can, like for example, the coughing posted by a patient in particular area and so on. So all this information is getting ingested around here, and then the location. And then based on an individual personal record, you can say the person is prone to asthmatic reactions. And then you have your rules. Remember the rules I showed you before. And here is a rule which says if AQI is between certain levels, then you can say that you may send an alert saying that there are some problems. And if there is a person who actually has asthma and running around and gets into this, immediately you tell the person air quality is not suitable to your asthma, just move indoors. And this all is happening dynamically. This guy is running, this person or woman is running on near in the park somewhere, and then suddenly the air quality index is bad. So the person is immediately sent a note saying that go to the indoor things. So you can do these kinds of things, okay? And you can see all kinds of examples happening in India. And again, this pervasive comes into the picture. So all the P9s I talked about you can see being manifested in this example. Again, my paper goes into these things in detail. So I'm going to summarize in the next few minutes. So the future here is smart healthcare, smart devices, smart networks, smart processes, smart EMRs, and everything is going to be smart. And in the United States, if you go to a store, you can get even smart water. And it's kind of interesting because in the future, actually, your water can have some nanoparticles in there. And when you drink it, that goes in and it can go and do all kinds of interesting things in your body, including delivering drugs. Okay, now here is what an example from a journal which I picked up or from on the internet. What we are thinking about, what we think in the future is we should have a system which should address these kinds of problems. And for those of you in the medical doctors, you can see that here is a 55-year-old male who was admitted to an hospital with some history of abdominal pain, distension, constipation, and vomiting. And initially, they did some things and they couldn't find what the problem was. And later, after doing the histopathological examination and all kinds of other things, they found out the diagnosis of Crohn's disease was made. But it was pretty hard for this to be made. And you can see many of you may be facing these kinds of dilemma where initially the patient comes and you think nothing is wrong with the particular patient, but then later after some time you see that there are some things, like especially some tumors which kind of simulate like Cushing's disease, although it's a tumor in an artery near the heart, it may show the signs of Cushing disease. So these are the kinds of things which a computer can help in the future. They will not replace doctors per se, although some people claim they replace radiologists. It's very hard. But what they're going to do is that they give you some augmentation and help in this process. Okay, here is a 21st century doc. So you can see. Anyway, I'm going to stop at this stage. I'm sorry, went a little bit over, but I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you, Subbarao Garu.
Thank you. Let me just get this back into, yep. Thank you, Dr. Sriram. That was, I don't know, personally, I'm kind of absorbing and trying to visualize what medicine and healthcare will be in the next 15, 20, 30 years. I mean, we have a lot of doctors and we should let them give their views. We have some questions and I'll start off with something at a macro level. If you can, if you're okay to take questions now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just picked this thought from Dr. Ravi Ramaswamy's post on the chat, and you answered it unwittingly in the last slide saying these digital technologies will not replace doctors. His specific question was, what will be the role of physicians in the next 10, 15, 20 years? So my macro thought is, you quoted more than once our ancient scriptures, Vedas, where the knowledge of our genetic makeup and other things were already there 5,000 years ago before the Western, research has found them or is working on them. Now, the question is, there's this famous well-known doctor in India called Dr. B.R. Hegde. And he teaches, he advocates going back to the basics. And one of his famous statements, and with apologies to all the doctors on the call, is that doctors only know about diseases, they do not know about health. And the reason he says that is because only diseased people come to the doctors for treatment. And the larger concept he is alluding to is we should be spending, focusing, researching more on promoting good health rather than treating the disease as an after fact. Yeah. So in that context, where do these technological digitization, digital technologies, how do they play into the future when the population is to be growing and we have large geographies which do not have access to basic healthcare?
Yeah, so that is exactly the idea behind the P9 medicine concept, because medicine has to be pervasive also. Because take, for example, villages, 80% of India, they claim is villages. So if you can provide care at the point of where the care is to be needed, And that is one thing that will reduce the cost, not only reduce the cost of healthcare, but also increase the quality of life for these people.
Mhm.
How can you do it? Like, for example, the example that I showed you, where you have sensors and all kinds of information out there. What you do is that in the rural areas, you have people taking, going to the, you can have teachers, for example, school teachers who can be trained, and they can go into the houses. There's a question of trust involved in here. They can go to these individual houses, take some basic vitals, such, and these vitals and all those things can go into a database somewhere, and people in Hyderabad or other places can look into this thing constantly, and it can provide automated. Most of the thing is automated, and then doctors can look into it, and then if there's something which is out of outliers, they can go to the expert, and expert can say what to do and things like that. And then, like for example, I showed you this virtual reality kind of things, where you can train the doctors to do things which like endoscopy or something like this. Virtually, you can teach them, and then they can go to even the primary care physicians can probably be able to do some of these things in the villages. And then also these guys have access to large amounts of knowledge across the internet, and most of the villages are connected in a way. Okay, and it will be connected in the future, especially with all these satellites and things like that. So they have access to this knowledge. So in knowledge lies the power. So once you give this amount of knowledge to these people, and they can, of course, one has to guide them in the proper way and so on. So you can see this whole ecosystem which is happening, where these knowledge systems are there. And then, even like, for example, you are in a primary care center, you take an image and you want to know what this is. And you have these AI systems which can go in and determine what kind of a potential problem that person has. Now you got to be careful. You cannot let the machine do everything. The doctors will have to be part of this process. So it's a communication between the doctor, the machine, and the patient. So that's the thing that.
There's one question relating to regulatory affairs and licensing, and from Dr. Rupa Shri, and she is wondering what are the ethical quality assurance. Let me just get her question up here. Are there any legal legislative guidelines for cyber and virtual reality as limitations in healthcare? And what are the quality assurance and safety tools that are used for AI in healthcare services sector? If you have any use cases.
Yeah, that's a good question. See, again, the AI in healthcare is really right now in its infancy in some sense. Okay, so it's getting there, and there's a lot of policies. The policy makers are still trying to figure out what exactly are the things. But then there are other things. For example, electronic health records. Okay, which I talked about. In fact, if you don't use it, you are in trouble now. And what will happen in the future is, if there's a malpractice suit, the person will ask, did you first check that the problem was somewhere on the internet, and someone has solved it, and you didn't check it, and you still made a mistake? So for not even using that, you may get into trouble.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things you need to look at. And even in electronic health records in the United States, for example, if you don't use it, the Medicare will cut your reimbursement. You got to show you got to use in a meaningful use. And the electronic health records, to use meaningful, when a doctor buys an electronic health record in the United States, that electronic health record has to be certified. And it is certified according to some tests which ONC has suggested, or not as there's a rule which ONC says you got to do all these things. And all those tests are actually developed by my people in my division. So the entire United States EHR really can be traceable to my division in terms of usage.
Interesting.
So that's one area. I mean, as apart from the machine learning things which I talked about, the macular degeneration, things like that, or the Alzheimer's things that I talk about, electronic health records. So there's so many things which you can do here. I mean, the field is vast.
Right.
And in India, especially, you have a lot of data, and in all these things, data is a gold mine there. RR is data, depending on how you look at it. That's a gold mine, and you have that in India.
So on that note,
is an important thing.
Yeah. So on that note, there's a question from Professor Iyengar. He acknowledges that there's a huge effort mounted in India on digitizing the electronic health records, which provides the scope for anytime healthcare, even in a country like India with such a large population. Now, he's wondering if the P9 model that you alluded to is implementable in our current situation in our country, in India.
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now, trying to work with some folks out there to implement P9, but at a scale. Because see, there's also some political issues involved in here that you need to deal with, because a lot of times it's not so much about the technological things that are the barriers, but the political situation in a particular village or whatever it is. There's a lot of politicians who want to take credit for it, and some people don't want to do it, and so on. Apart from that, it is implementable, and I'm working I had a workshop in IIT Madras in September on digital well-being, and Madras and Tamil Nadu is pretty good at it. Okay, so they have a solid interest. The government itself is interested in making this happen. So we may take up a small area in there and make this happen. And similarly, my goal is to also do that in Hyderabad, and I've been talking with a few people there. I don't know whether Srini is here on the. Srini Raju, been talking with him. And we also hope to have some kind of workshop on AI and GI in India in March and so on. So there's a lot of interest. There's interest in India, and I think we can make this happen.
Yeah, okay, great.
But again, the scale is the main thing. If you can show some prototypes and we can show it works, and it can explode in India.
Right.
But it's so cost. That's why I had last one P9. Cost is a very important thing to price. It has to be price effective. In the United States, you spend billions and billions of dollars on these things, and that's not the model you want in India. You want a model which can be implemented within given costs.
This is
also involved at the large scale, Department of Biotechnology and so on.
Right. Yeah. There's a unrelated question, but one of our senior members has asked this. When do you think or anticipate there would be a vaccine to prevent cancer? I know it's
that's not my expertise.
I know.
Okay? So in terms of the vaccine, there's a lot of risk. Unfortunately, the problem is that cancer is what people have been working for ages, and the different kinds, and there's so many types of cancer. So you just can't say cancer as such, because as you know, cancer has different mechanisms. The tumor suppression genes are the breaking genes, the repair genes, and so on. So many genes acting in so many ways of interactions and so on. So what I think is some of the things that I talked about, the networks will help you to do the simulation part of it. And maybe you can do an in silico simulation and do some in vitro kind of experiments in there. So that will help in this process. But when you get the cure of cancer, I don't know. I mean, if I can do that, say that, maybe, maybe I can be a multi-billionaire.
One other thought is, I heard this said by some people, the future of healthcare is really going to be determined by biologists. And there's a lot of, and we had a interesting speaker again, one of our classmates, who talked about how biology is a lot of mathematics and analytics actually today, and is playing a huge role in the new paths in healthcare that people are researching on. Is there any interface that your team has with the biologists?
Yeah, so we work very closely with the biologists. And actually, it's interesting thing, biology is digital. As I said before, like GCAT, if you can consume this as GCAT is the one which is biology. So biology is digital. Okay. So if biology is digital, then digital is the future. If people say biology is the future.
Yeah.
So I think, anyway, I'm just putting it simply, but then to make this happen, there's a lot of things are happening in different fields. Like they're happening in bioinformatics, happening in computer science, happening in the genomics field. So all these fields kind of converge at some point. Okay, so it's not a single field. So it's multiple fields, as I've showed you, the future healthcare vision. It's not like a single path. You have to take multiple paths into it.
Yeah. With all the concerns, there are still some concerns about EHR especially in India, people are a little reluctant because, there's a possibility of hacking into this. Can patients opt out of their records being on EHR for security reasons, or is there any regulation surrounding that?
Patients can always opt out. So that's the, I mean, what do you mean by patients opt out? Because the EHRs exist in a hospital, all the information is taken and put in an EHR. Now, what's important out there is if the patient says that, no one normally says that, okay? Because what happens is the minute the patient comes to your office, you just take it as a sign, take a signature saying that, yeah, you give, all those things are, you go to United States, I don't know, but in India, in US, you go to a doctor, you write off everything, sign on everything, saying this data can be used for, for that and so on and so forth, okay? Now, where that is important is that, like, for example, this electronic health records here is the difference between US and India. In United States, almost everyone is using electronic health records. And there are certain doctors who opt out of it, but then they're old people who are retiring and so on and so forth. But the younger generation, they're all in for it. They love it. It's only the older people and people are not, who find it very hard to type and things like that. But then that thing is changing too, because you have something called Naturally Speaking Dragon, where you can dictate into the system.
Yeah.
Even for Indian accents, it's there.
Right.
So these things are all, so they're different. More, I think in the future, your communication with the computer is going to be pretty smooth. So they're going to be like speech, and we are doing some work on speech emotion recognition. Here's the problem: like when a patient goes to the doctor, the patient, for example, can be saying that, oh, I have a stomach ache here, I have ache here, I have ache there, but actually the patient is really doesn't have that problem. Okay. So what you can do with the speech emotion recognition is you can tell the patient is lying. The patient actually doesn't have the problem. So again, in the future, when the patient comes in and talks to the doctor, there'll immediately be a sign on the doctor screen saying that this patient is what is that? Lying. It doesn't really happen. So those things can happen. And also there's a question of capture of the information. Right now, the doctors will have to type in and things like that, and that's a big problem with EHRs. Instead of that, non-intuitively, by speech, by your, like I'm moving my hands and things like that, the gestures and all those things, if the system can get the information automatically, it'll be great. And that will happen too. I think Dr. Rupasri has her hand up here.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for this. Now, since I am representing, even though I'm an Indian by birth and by things, I'm representing UK. So I would like to say opting out is a possibility in UK. They can opt out from recording from their data. I work for TAN, that is trauma care, and also in sepsis and also acute deterioration of patient area. So this is my core line. Here in UK, the patients can opt out from recording of their data, even in the hospital and also in the portals also. They can say, because of security reason, I don't want my data to be not to be shared. So the patient owns their data, so they have the rights. It's not the hospital, or it's not me, the doctor, who can. So this is one more perception from UK areas. I just thought I should share it. Thank you.
No, I agree with you, because in the United States, there is something, there is a rule which is going to come on the patient from a patient perspective. Okay. So that's why I said the medicine has to be patient-centric, because the patient should have control over his or her medical record. Now, the data need not be shared, but then can the data exist in a medical record is a different question. Like when the patient comes in, you record the data. If the patient says that I don't want anything to be recorded, then you have a problem around here, because so far we don't encounter that problem here. In the case where the patient says that, no, I don't want my data to be, because you say that if you can't record the data, oh yeah, you have your files, but the doctor, unfortunately, the way the rule is that the doctor will have to record the patient's data. So it's a catch-22 problem here. So I don't know, I have to check the rules here, but there is something called patient security is a big thing. So we have all kinds of mechanisms for the security of the patient data. the privacy.
Here, one more issue is even the gender. If the patient does not want to say which gender it is, so they don't want it to be recorded. So the option is there for the patient. Even the diagnosis and also the history, maybe alcohol or drug abuse, or even related to post surgery areas. So they don't want it to be recorded. So the patient has the rights. So we give them that option.
But also Europe is a little more stringent than US on these things. So
Yeah.
the requirements are more stringent there than what we have. But we are very concerned about the patient's privacy and things like that. So there are all kinds of things which are being put in. I also participate in there is a committee here, HITAC, HITAC, which is the one which makes these recommendations on interoperability and what kind of data you can put in, how can you protect the patient's rights and so on, and privacy and so on and so forth. So those things are happening, but to the best of my knowledge, with EHRs right now, most doctors are supposed to record at least, because they get an incentive based on that. Especially Medicare, they want to kind of see the trends, and they want to use those trends to make medicine more efficient.
I have a related question. Does a patient, by law, have a right to ask for and access his EHRs at any time?
Yes.
Okay, because in
Yeah.
India specifically, if you see, if you have a patient admitted in the hospital, the doctor or the nursing station, they are very reluctant to give you the case sheet or the medical records.
Yeah, you're supposed to give it immediately. Then there's now here is an interesting problem. What happened in United States too, depending on where you are, where you practice, things are different. Like for example, in the Baltimore area, many of the patients are homeless. They don't even have food to eat. No one has this electronic, sophisticated phones and things like that. Now they never access. Even if you give them access, they say we can't even access. What are we talking about?
Right.
Whereas if you go to a place like Palo Alto, patients are very sophisticated. They've done much more reading than, they even come to the doctor and tell what potential problems they could have, and so on and so forth. And actually doctors are facing this problem nowadays because the patients go to the internet and sometimes, do chat GPT and things like that, which kind of tells based on your symptoms you have this particular disease.
Yeah.
But those kinds of things are happening too now. So there's a very sophisticated patient. That's why I said in the social networks, there's a patient network, there's a doctor network, and all kinds of networks are happening. And patients talk to one another also.
Yeah.
So this whole thing is kind of changing. The whole practice of medicine is changing.
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
And I think we'll.
There are different kinds of doctors. The patients who are very poor, who don't have access to it, and the patients want to know everything. But as per the US laws, the doctor has to provide the electronic health record.
Come to the last question. One Dr. Amaresh Rao has asked a question as to what do you suggest the doctors, in terms of training, what should they be updating themselves with to be relevant in the changing times, to the times that are coming up that you have showed?
I mean, it depends. Like there's so much information on the web, so it's overwhelming in some sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interest too. For example, I read the New England Journal of Medicine every week. My wife gets it. My wife is the doctor. She gets it, but I managed to test reading. That's because I'm interested in knowing what's happening out there. Similarly, there's a lot of magazines in the digital world. The doctors could be interested in looking at these magazines and see what, like MIT Technology Review is one of them, which produces. There are lots of digital for digital healthcare. There are lots of magazines which you can go through it. There's a site called ONC, Office of the National Coordinator for Healthcare in the United States. You should go to their website. They've got a wealth of information on there. So there's a lot of information available on it. And then they have WebMD, all kinds of things which you can go through. Now, one of the things that happens in India, I don't know how much EHR is used in the hospitals is a question, because in Indian hospitals, most of the procedures and all those things are recorded, images are recorded, but do the doctors have time to record history and physical and those kinds of things? I don't know. You have to talk to the Indian hospitals, like Apollo or AIG, and these are the hospitals which are the forefront of using these technologies. And those hospitals will have to implement first. But what is their incentive? In the United States, what happened is the government said, if a doctor uses EHR in a meaningful way, we are going to give you $40,000 to $60,000.
Oh,
And if you don't use this EHS, we are going to cut off your Medicare reimbursement, or reduce, not cut off, reduce. So this incentive thing. What is the incentive in India?
yeah. The other thing is what Professor
I think
Iyengar was.
Dr.
Yeah,
Arora,
I'll come to you, Dr. Arora, just a minute. The other interesting thing to allude to, in continuation of what you said, is what Professor Iyengar said. There is a central government effort to digitize all records. But what is lacking at the moment, I think, is, like you said yourself, there's no networking of this data. There's no central collation to data mine and use big data to draw trends. Individual hospital like Apollo may have it, AIG may have it, but are these systems talking to each other? I don't think there is a central system.
Yeah, but what's the incentive of the system to talk to each other?
Yeah, exactly. It has to be the law. In India, it has to be the law.
Yeah.
I don't think the incentive system the government will implement. If they say, maybe the patient name is not, it can be agnostic, but then all data should be shared with the government, backbone or whatever. So we'll need to understand that.
Yeah, because many of the hospitals which are doing like AIG, the hospital is interested. There's someone there who has a vision, and that's the way you're doing it. You're doing it not because the government is asking to do it. You're doing it because you want to do it. And I'm sure that in Apollo also, they may have their own network. But Apollo may also have an incentive because they have the huge number of hospitals all over the country and the world. So they may want to interoperate between even their own hospitals.
Exactly, yeah. Dr. Arora, you wanted to say something?
Dr. Sriram, I've got one, want your view also on this. In a Siachen war, I was using robotic arm for surgical intervention. But what happened due to heavy snowfall, it had a link with Bangalore, a big hospital of the armed forces. Due to heavy snowfall, what happened? The link got broken. It was satellite based and it stopped functioning. So I wish to know from you, do you find similar thing in US in areas which are snowbound? Is there an interference?
I don't know. Actually, there may be things going on, but I'm not. It's a good question. I don't know the answer as such, whether it has happened here or not, because I don't keep track too much of those things. And also, you have to understand one thing: many of these robotic devices are very expensive to maintain, and and then a lot of them are not really robots as such, but they're teleoperated kind of device. They call them robotic devices. So, I mean, there's a little bit hype in there, but that's a different story. But what they'll help you to do is precision guided surgery in a way, because a lot of times your hand shakes a little bit and so on. So this will help you to reduce all that. So they have, and in certain surgeries, they're very useful. They're not useful for everything. So you got to be careful when you kind of use those things. Sometimes people in hospitals just have a robotic surgery division in there, so that they'll tell people that we have robotic things going on. So there's a lot of things which you have to be careful. So you have to weigh the economics of the situation of how useful this is. But the trend is going on there. But like, for example, there are robots which can do simple things like moving around the room to room, doing some care and so on. So these are very practical, and then there's a return of investment easily you can see on that. But things like Da Vinci robot and so on the return of investment, your hospital has to calculate and see, how do I get the return of investment on that?
That's true.
Dr. Amresh, you raised your hand, and can we make that the last question, please? It's 8 o'clock.
No, I just wanted to make a comment regarding the interoperability of health records in India. The government's digital health mission does lay a lot of emphasis on maintenance of digital records and interoperability. However, what it has not specified is who would spend money for maintenance of those records and who would finance it. So because of that, the hospitals are not very keen, because the doctors are not very keen, because they see no value in it. The patients are not very keen because they say it doesn't help them, but it only helps the insurance companies. So that's why one of the reasons why adoption is considered to be difficult in this scenario is the patient's lack of trust that it is entirely going to be beneficial for them.
And also, Dr. Amresh, you have a problem of volume too in India, because you're seeing so many patients per day. Where's the time of inputting all this stuff in the?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting problem.
Well, all good things have to come to an end. I think we should call it a day for this evening. On behalf of the president of Foswell Hyderabad, Dr. Sriram, I'd like to thank you again for this wonderful talk. It has been personally, it has been very illuminating. And I worked many years ago in medical imaging in GE when I started my career out of college. And at that time, we thought the CTs and MRIs and PET scans were the latest innovation in the world. But looks like, we are going to see the next wave of a revolution with these digital technologies. So it was very fascinating and very comprehensive, and I appreciate that. May I now call upon our secretary, Mr. Subhash Chandra Bose, to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you. President of Foswell Hyderabad, Sri Venkateswara Rao Garu, distinguished speaker, Dr. Ram D. Sriram, Foswellians and guests. Thank you all for joining our 169th monthly meeting. This meeting marks the beginning of the 15th year of Foswell Hyderabad without a break so far. We wish to thank each one of the distinguished speakers, patrons, endowment donors, logistic donors, and most importantly, our members who made this journey possible and so very agreeable. At this moment, we also remember and pay tributes to late M.L. Swami Garu, the prime mover in setting up Foswell for his vision and foresight. We thank Dr. U. Ravi Rao for the logistics sponsorship for the month of January every year in the name of his mother, Mrs. U. Manorama Rao. Thank you, Sri TPVS Shekhar Rao, for reading the prayer. Thank you, Dr. Amresh Rao Malempati, for introducing the distinguished speaker. As the head of the cardiothoracic and vascular surgery at the prestigious NIMS, it was most apt that you introduced the distinguished speaker. It is simply astounding as to how healthcare is set to change in the coming years. It is certainly difficult to even visualize the technologies to come for laymen like most of us. What is particularly relevant to our country is that hopefully these technologies that are set to revolutionize healthcare will help doctors be more easily accessible to our large population that lives in our villages. The manner in which Dr. Ram Sriram led us through from the very basics to how all these newer digital technologies are set to impact the way healthcare is delivered to the citizens was nothing short of mesmerizing. The very graphic slides helped us understand the concepts. We thank you, Dr. Ram D. Sriram, for not only spending the evening with us, but also for the efforts that obviously went into the great presentation. Thank you, and we wish you and your team every success in your efforts to provide affordable health care to the billions across the globe. We propose to continue with the Zoom meetings every month till further notice. Our forthcoming meetings and eminent speakers are February 18th, 2023, Mr. Vijay Balakrishnan, retired technical executive from the US, will speak on his book, The Swaraj Spy. On 18th March 2023, Dr. Vikas Sukhatme, Dean, Chief Academic Officer, and Emory Healthcare Woodruff Professor at Emory School of Medicine, will speak on his pioneering work on new frontiers in cancer cure. On 15th April 2023, Mr. Sharma APVN IAS, former Secretary, Ministry of Shipping and Ports, Government of India, will speak on development of the shipping and ports infrastructure in India in recent years. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, till we meet on the third Saturday, 18th February 2023, for our 170th monthly meeting. Stay safe and wish you all a very happy New Year. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bosgaro. And I'll just keep the meeting open for a couple of minutes. If those of you who are new wish to put in your email address in the chat box to receive future invitations, please do that now. Thank you, Sriram. It was very nice.
Thank you very much for giving the opportunity, and I really enjoyed the talk. And I know there are a number of questions on the chat, which I can't answer right now given the time. But
I know, yeah.
You can contact me anytime.
And I can share your presentation, you said, right, with our members?
Yeah, go ahead. You have it recorded, and then also you have the slides.
Slide
so
deck, yeah.
If anyone wants it, they can give them the slide deck.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.